These are just a few ideas about what the work here might be about. Then again, perhaps it's just a bad case of post-rationalisation. I didn't start out with a preconceived idea of what I was trying to achieve in this show at street level. In fact, I had no idea at all. The portrait that triggered off the series was the picture of my Slovenian friend Spela. That's the image of the girl with the bread and sinister knife. She had just done a project of her own which involved her giving random friends and acquaintances a recipe for a loaf of bread. She then photographed the people and their loaves. This gave me the idea of photographing Spela herself with bread, and I thought it might be interesting to experiment with the idea of showing her as if she was in some sort of suspended animation. I quite often try things out just to see how they'll turn out, but in this case I found myself becoming slightly haunted by the image. I looked at it again and again. I wasn't sure why I was drawn to looking at this particular image more often than I'd normally look at one of my more conventional portraits. There's a great West Coast Scottish word, a dwam. A dwam, as you all know, is a daydream. I've always thought that seeing someone in a dwam can be curiously fascinating. You can spot someone in a dwam on a bus or in the street, sometimes from quite a distance. The weird thing is that they stand out like a sore thumb. They're there physically but completely absent otherwise. And you have to wonder what it is that's made them so removed from the present. And I think the thing that makes them stand out is the complete absence of any facial expression. From birth we're hardwired to respond to faces. Even a brand new tiny baby responds to faces and can even imitate facial gestures from a very young age. Another example of how hardwired we are is the psychological phenomenon called pareidolia. That's where you see faces in clouds or in the embers of a fire. I once had an advertising job which was an advert to persuade people to leave their cars at home and use public transport. I had to create an image which was a bird's eye view of a motorway with a huge nose-to-tail traffic jam. We photographed individual cars from a great height using a cherry picker. I was so terrified that my assistant took the pictures while I trembled and went through the motions of supervising the shoot. I also had to create an image of a large expanse of tarmacked road. It was impossible to get high enough to shoot enough road in one shot, so I used a smaller section of road that I'd shot from a bridge on the M8 and then duplicated that image and stitched the images together to make a long stretch of road. The weird thing was that when I'd completed the image of the road and before I placed the cars in the shot, I was slightly amazed to find that the face of Jesus had appeared smack bang in the middle of the shot. It was exactly like the image in the Turin Shroud. I don't know if you've heard of the wifey in Florida who noticed an image of the Virgin Mary in a slice of toasted cheese she'd made. She claimed it brought her luck in casinos, and she went on to sell it on eBay for $28,000. What more evidence do you need to confirm our pre-programmed hunger for faces? And not only are we hardwired to recognise faces, but we're all more or less expert at reading facial expressions. According to some recent scientific research, we all have in our brains things called mirror neurons. About 10 years ago, some Italian scientists started wiring monkeys' brains up and discovered that a wired-up monkey observing another monkey performing some action had the very same bits of its brain activated as were activated in the observed monkey. Scientists have gone on to confirm the very same thing in humans. When we see somebody else's facial expression, we have the very same bits of our brain activated which correspond to the bits in the other person's brain that caused the expression in the first place. So this means, even if we can't necessarily articulate what an expression means, we have a similar bit of our brain mirroring what we're seeing, and therefore we might have a clue about what is going on in the other person's head. One of the theories around at the moment suggests that autism could be explained by a disruption of this mechanism. They also think it could explain empathy and the development of language and perhaps quite a few other things besides. A good friend of mine who's a psychologist introduced me to the idea of emotional leakage. We don't wear our hearts in our sleeves, we wear our hearts in our coupons, and it's mostly involuntary to boot. The only major exceptions are actors, con men, politicians and perhaps poker players. The scientists have even studied what's going on in the faces of convincing liars. When they film the liars and then slow the film right down, they find telltale micro-expressions which reveal what the liar is actually feeling. These micro-expressions are so rapid that they're virtually subliminal. They can't be seen consciously. but it might explain why we have an intuition about someone but can't quite put our finger on why. So what, might you ask, does any of this have to do with the work you see before you? Well, maybe nothing. On the other hand, it might explain why when we look at a blank face which betrays no trace of any emotion, we might feel as if we want to fill in the gaps. In these pictures there's all the other stuff around them which suggests something going on, but who knows what. It's all a mystery. Because the subjects are looking off camera, there's a suggestion that there's other things going on outside the frame too, and that's also a mystery. We're like voyeurs, and the subjects aren't giving anything away. A lot of portraits give us the false impression that we're making a connection with the subject. It's like we're sharing a pleasant moment together. I'm personally not a great fan of the idea of capturing somebody's personality in a photograph. I actually think it's probably impossible. In a conventional photograph, you're recording a split-second moment on the subject's face, which is a product of a collaboration between the photographer and the sitter. I do that all the time when I have my advertising hat on. It's all about conveying whatever mood is required. It's usually trying to give the impression that all is well in the world of whatever product is being promoted. All is usually wonderful and perfect in advertising land, and as we all know, it's completely untrue. On the domestic front, when we look at a wonderful picture of Auntie Jean in a photo album, it's because the picture is a tiny moment in time when she's happened to be in a good mood. It's not a true representation of her personality, or maybe it's just a wee bit of it, the bit you like to remember. When you point a camera at somebody, they respond if they notice the camera. In these images, I've tried to suppress that acknowledgement of the camera. I've not tried to capture the essence of the person. It's more like taking a life cast, like treating the subject as a still life. It's actually very difficult. People are always busy emoting. There's lots of micro expressions going on. Sometimes during a shoot, I probably sound like a hypnotist or some weird meditation instructor. I also shoot remotely, so there's none of the usual face-to-face stuff going on, and I sometimes fire the shutter at random when I think everything is sufficiently still. After all this, it's interesting how few shots are approaching the right degree of non-expression. The usual ratio is 1 or 2 frames out of 80 to 100. Searching for the elusive ultimate blank face is almost like wildlife photography. The end result is essentially meaningless, neutral and ambiguous. It's all these things. I want to quote from my emotional leakage pal. She says, "Our past experiences, current concerns and preoccupations and future fears and expectations all influence our interpretation of what we see. These influences offer a range of potential meanings that we accept and reject. These influences therefore affect our interpretation and will change with time. Ambiguous images are a great example of this. This is where we can sometimes watch an image change its content and meaning whilst the incoming sensory information remains unchanged. Seeing is therefore not merely a passive processing of stimuli, but also a projection of our internal world and an attempt to find meaning and the best available interpretation. Our current seeing depends on our past, and we use that to provide some prediction and an understanding of the future and what we see before us." I couldn't have put it better myself. Also recently there was a guy on the television in a programme all about optical illusions. He goes by the name of Albrow and works at the University College London. He said, and I quote, "Illusions show us that our brains are very good at constructing meaning from the meaningless." So I hope you can find some meaning or something approaching it in these pictures. Thank you.